All right. Very good morning and a very good evening, folks. It is 2 minutes past 9:30 a.m. in the morning here in KL and 2 minutes past 9:30 p.m. for some of us in the East Coast of the United States. Welcome, everyone. We are here for another edition of the Foreign Policy Speaker Series, a collaboration between ISIS Malaysia and the US Embassy in Kuala Lumpur, which seeks to bring together speakers from both Malaysia and the US for a spirited and thoughtful discussion on key issues that concern both our countries. Today, we are focusing on something that has always been a hot button issue, the South China Seas, and in particular, we're looking at the challenges and the opportunities and prospects for collaboration on the South China Sea. As many of you are aware, the South China Sea is one of Malaysia's most strategic but also vulnerable maritime domains. And if you've been following the news, it does seem that the status quo of the dispute is increasingly being defined by a might makes right approach instead of norms grounded in international law. At the same time, Malaysian policymakers are also very concerned that the internationalization of the dispute will only see, a further entrenchment of major power competition, adding to the challenges of littoral states like Malaysia. Some of the questions that we hope to tackle today are the US approach to the South China Sea. What are some of the key nuances in DC that folks here should be aware of when it comes to the South China Sea? A Malaysian perspective on how the US approaches the South China Sea. Perhaps how have developments in the South China Sea impacted the environmental and economic concerns of local communities there? And what are the opportunities and prospects for the US in supporting multiple stakeholders in Malaysia to improve and promote the capacity for stability, sustainable economic growth, and domain awareness? So to do that for us today, we have three excellent speakers, and we have Satu Limai from the East West Center, Ivy Kwek from the Research for Social Advancement, and Shariman Lokman from ISIS Malaysia. I will introduce all of them in turn properly. So for our first speaker, and Satu, you have heard this a million times before, so because you're Satu, you're going first. We have Satu Limai, a good friend of ISIS. Satu is the Vice President of the East-West Center and currently serving as the Director of the East-West Center in DC, and also the Asia Matters for America initiative, an excellent initiative that I recommend all of you checking out. Satu is the founding editor of the Asia Pacific Bulletin and a senior advisor at the Center for Naval Analysis and a senior fellow of history and policy at the Foreign Policy Institute at the Paul H. Nietzsche School. He has published widely, speaks widely on the Asia Pacific regional issues, and was just, in the conversation before, complaining that it is the longest period of time since he has ever been to Malaysia. Satu, I turn the floor over to you. You have 10 minutes, sir.
Well, good morning to colleagues and friends in Malaysia. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. We are at the tail end of our July 4th Independence Day weekend. It's about 9:30 in the evening, so I shall try to be as brief and clear as I can. And I, once again, thank ISIS Malaysia, Thomas, colleagues at the embassy, and of course at the US Embassy for this invitation. I'm going to focus on two broad issues. One is the whole issue of stability and reassurance on South China Sea and how the different parties, I think, could attend to this. And the second is to look for some ways for US and Malaysia to forge ahead. Apropos Thomas's comments about multiple stakeholders, as well as ongoing defense and security ties between our two countries. My own view is very clear that stability and reassurance is a responsibility of all parties, but the primary challenger to stability and reassurance in Southeast Asia and on the South China Sea in particular is China. And that is because of, in my view, China's 9-dash line, expansive, assertive, and at odds with legal claims, which is the fundamental problem that is undermining stability and reassurance. China's trends towards claiming historical rights to waters historical fishing rights, and quite assertive fishing in the EEZs of other regional countries is, I think, a fundamental problem, and has been pointed out by many others as well. There is also the Chinese trend to increasingly domesticate governance of claimed areas and its aspirations in the region. Most recently, the January 2021 Coast Guard law also has given pause to regional states, as well as others, about China's plans and claims as to what it can and cannot do with its Coast Guard in the region. And then, of course, finally, we have multiple incidents across multiple countries at multiple junctures over the past decade in particular, where China's fishing fleet and maritime militia activities have created disputes and have created agitation and anxiety amongst regional states. In the case of Malaysia, you all know far better than I, James Shoal, West Kapala incident, and most recently, the sort of difficult to imagine and difficult to understand and explain overflights over Malaysian territory by PLA forces. So all of that's been in the press, it's well known. And so I would say that stability and reassurance is first and foremost a responsibility of China, which I believe is taking certain actions that is creating this instability and this lack of assurance amongst regional states. That's not to say that Southeast Asia and South China Sea claimants do not themselves have some responsibilities as well. In my view, there's been very limited progress on Southeast Asia-wide consensus, and South China Sea claimant coordination consensus has also been quite modest. There's been some progress between intra-Southeast Asian claims, as you all know, the agreements between Malaysia and the Southern Command in Vietnam, ongoing on and off talks amongst the four major claimants, some confidence building. But overall, I think the picture is one of very little consensus in Southeast Asia as a whole, but also amongst the claimants on the South China Sea. So that has not added to or further solidified stability and reassurance. ASEAN as an organization is becoming increasingly, I think, less relevant to regional cohesion and decision-making because of the differences of views, also different trajectories of domestic politics, and many other factors. So the bottom line is that this compounds the questions of stability and reassurance. And what's made worse, I think, is that the South China Sea claimant interactions with China are not only empirically more difficult because of the recent incidents, whether that be Vietnam or the Philippines or Malaysia, but there's really less and less common space. Now, people will say the code of conduct offers a common space for the claimants as well as Southeast Asia to negotiate with China. I remain cautious and somewhat skeptical that the code of conduct is a panacea or a solution for the lack of stability and reassurance. It's not clear that the code of conduct will go quickly. In a recent seminar that I participated in, a very senior Indonesian official claimed that the code of conduct was the locus of action now on the South China Sea. Perhaps it will be, but I have yet to see the evidence that this long-running process, almost 2 decades now, is making headway and will bring about the kind of stability and reassurance that will prevent incidents as we've seen over the last decade and even in recent weeks. That brings me to the United States. I see very little fundamental change in the US approach between the Trump administration and the Biden administration, which will be on many people's minds. We are still in the midst of just 6 months into the new administration or so, and Southeast Asia policy as well as South China Sea policy is evolving, but I think there are a number of continuities that I would flag. First, US officials have largely framed China's behavior as a challenge to the rule of law and sought to highlight, for example, the PCS tribunal ruling and UNCLOS. Second, particularly during the Trump administration, actions were taken on specific PRC entities, Chinese entities that were operating and conducting activities in the South China Sea. You're aware of those. Third, There's continued overflight and naval and maritime activities, sometimes called freedom of navigation operations. Those are likely to continue to challenge what in the US are seen as illegal or expansive claims in the region. Fourth, South China Sea remains a fundamental basis, but not the only basis for continued US security, defense, and diplomatic cooperation with regional countries. And that goes both bilaterally and multilaterally. For example, it includes inter-ASEAN cooperation on such initiatives as the Maritime Security Initiative, of which Malaysia is one partner amongst many. And so there's ongoing efforts in that space. And later on, I'll just talk about some other options that I see that could be examined between US and Malaysia. So far, I don't see any fundamental break in the past decade of US policy towards the South China Sea. There may yet be surprises or new initiatives, but so far the fundamentals of the approach remain key. And I think this is particularly important in the Malaysian case, and what one can talk about the Philippine case as well, is there is a view amongst some of us anyway, that the United States cannot be more forward-leaning on the South China Sea than the regional partners whose claim and sovereign claims are at play. In other words, the US can continue to support lawfare, can continue to support diplomacy, can continue to support capability, but cannot substitute for the approaches of national government. Let me conclude with some options. I think there's a lot of options, mostly in the defense and security realm. I'd be interested in hearing my Malaysian colleagues talk about multiple stakeholder. I think the most important multiple stakeholder effort the US can do is talk about the salience of the maritime space for Malaysia's future on energy, fishing, transport, etc. But it seems to me, anyways, from an outsider, and again, I defer to my Malaysian colleagues for their expertise and insights, that there still seems to be insufficient salience of understanding about what's at stake in the South China Sea. So I will leave it there. I think reviving US P-8 patrols is an option. I think there's some really interesting options for using ongoing exercises. There are multiple bilateral and multilateral exercises between the US and Malaysia. In particular, I think CCAT and CARET could be tweaked to do some coalition building. I think there's ongoing work on MSI, which could be ramped up. I think there's some particular opportunities for US and Malaysia to work with non-claimant countries, such as Thailand and the Gulf of Thailand, that would improve our maritime capabilities respectively. An area which Ivy and others have written about the need to further think through in the context of the Defense White Paper what Malaysia needs, and we could take them out of the more sensitive areas such as South China Sea and perhaps look at the Gulf of Thailand and other areas where we could cooperate, including, for example, some assistance in the context of the Sulu Sea and the trilateral coordinated maritime patrols. But the most general thing I would say is that the overall US-Malaysia relationship needs to be strengthened. We got off to a very good start a few years ago with the Comprehensive Partnership and the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. I think there's a lot of opportunity to build on that, not only in the people-to-people space, but as I said, particularly in dialogues that highlight the salience and importance of the maritime space to Malaysia's future. So I'm 27 or 29 seconds over my time. So let me conclude there so that I don't get admonished by our moderator and turn it over back to him. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here.
Yes, thank you very much, Satu. On time to the dot. Ladies and gentlemen, before I turn it over to Ivy, I should remind you that if you have any questions, please remember to type them in the Q&A tab and not the chat tab. So just that little reminder. We now move on to our second speaker, Ivy Quek. Ivy is the Research Director at the Research for Social Advancement, REFSA, a progressive non-for-profit think tank in Malaysia. She's also concurrently a visiting scholar at the Center for Southeast Asian Studies at National Cheng Chi University in Taiwan. Prior to this, Ivy was a special functions officer to the Deputy Minister of Defense in Malaysia, during which she was involved in the drafting of the first Malaysian defense white paper. Ivy is also a co-founder of a local blog called Project Pertiwi, which is dedicated to raising awareness on defense and security among Malaysia's youth. Ivy, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Thomas, for the very kind introduction. Good morning and good evening to all of you, depending on where you're joining us from. And I would also like to thank ISIS Malaysia for inviting me to share a few thoughts on this very important issue of South China Sea that is definitely much discussed and has been ongoing for a long time. In fact, I think you can be forgiven if you ever let out a sigh, because this issue has seemed to be ongoing and never seems to have an end to it. So kudos to all of you for joining us today and not giving up our hopes on this issue. So I think that while the disputes of South China Sea is not new, there has been some recent developments that have shown us that we are facing a new set of even more complex challenges. I believe that we are currently actually facing a conundrum on the issue of South China Sea. As we know, China has been more assertive in its claims over Nine-Dash Line, and even more so arguably since the 2016 court ruling has dismissed its claim. Some of the notable examples are the standoff last year in Luconia shores between Malaysian, China, and Vietnam, where Malaysian survey ships has been attacked and followed very closely by Chinese coast guards, leading to some very close encounters. The Audit General reports has also reported 89, at least in 89 intrusions by Chinese vessels in Malaysian waters from 2016 to 2019. And of course, we know about the recent incident of 16 military planes flying, Chinese military planes flying very close to Malaysia's airspace. All these incidents have forced us to confront the reality of living with a giant neighbor that is increasingly getting more restless and flexing its muscle more. So because of these assertive claims, it has prompted more attention given to the region. And these include the formation of the US-led Indo-Pacific strategy that is supported by the Quad, which of course the Chinese perceive as a containment strategy. And interestingly, I think this has in turn fueled further insecurity on the Chinese part. The worsening of the US-China relations and the framing of China as a strategic competitor by the US have sowed further mistrust between the two great powers and have led to a series of action-reactions. I think that at the operational level, these have increased the risk of missteps and miscalculation in the waters. So I think that over this backdrop of more intense great power competitions as well as Chinese assertive claims, there are very little goodwill left between the littoral states and China, as well as between US and China. The different interpretation of the international law by the different claimant states has made any dispute resolution almost a non-starter. Malaysia is very apprehensive to enter any talks with China because this might be construed as a tacit nod to China's claim. But at the same time, it is also not very forthcoming, despite knowing the importance of cooperation with the US. It feels the need to manage it in a way that does not antagonize China. So this has led to essentially a paralysis of the situation, where I think every moves made by any parties are seen as malign or malafide, And small states like Malaysia felt the need to tip their toes around the great powers. And I think that this, while we seek to resolve these geopolitical tensions, we tend to also overlook some of the very pertinent non-traditional security issues. Lest we forget that South China Sea supports the livelihood of many population, especially at the coastal communities. And this is also a region that is facing a very rampant problem of overfishing and illegal fishing. Just pulling out some stats, I think that the fish stocks in South China Sea has severely depleted by at least 70% since the 1950s. And the environmental degradation has also reached a very alarming point. These are issues that have a very severe and irreversible impact on South China Sea, but because of the outstanding disputes, there has not been much progress. So in terms of the way forward, I think that in many ways, the prospect for collaboration in South China Sea hinges very much on the future of the US-China relations. So there is a need to diffuse tensions at the macro level. That said, I think that both the US and China needs to stop seeing South China Sea from the lens of strategic competition with each other, and stop overinterpreting some of the actions, or for the matter of fact, the inactions of smaller states as a sign of allegiance or subservience to one or the other. To borrow a very trendy word now, I think we need to decouple the issues of South China Sea from strategic competition. I believe that there is a lot of room to improve in terms of strengthening US and Malaysia cooperation. I echo Dr. Satu's view on that. And particularly, I think that the US and Malaysia cooperation should emphasize more on capacity building that will build long to medium term capacity for our local partners. So Malaysia has been a beneficiary of US maritime security initiatives, and we are also the recipients of the very useful Scan Eagles. But I think that there are more needs to be done in terms of increasing Malaysia's capability, especially in terms of surveillance, detection, and reconnaissance. So capacity building with local stakeholders to increase maritime domain awareness should be continued, and more emphasis should also be given to coast guards and the fishermen. Moving on to Malaysia, I think that on Malaysia's part, we need to have a more proactive South China policy. I think that being proactive does not mean that we are deviating from our usual neutral, don't choose side stance, which is something that Malaysia held very close to. I think that we need to be proactive and more creative in the sense that we need to do more with our partners. Malaysia needs to strengthen dialogues with China, because I think that no communications, whatever it is, no communications and no mutual understanding is a very dangerous situation. So we need to strengthen dialogue to diffuse some of the tensions. But at the same time, I think that we should not be afraid to strengthen cooperation with the US or the other partners. I think that the cooperation between the other claimant states are also very important. I also agree with Satu when he says that there is a lack of consensus between Southeast Asia claimant states. And in particular, I think that some unilateral cooperation should be devised to solve some of the more immediate issues. One of the very encouraging development recently is the fishing MOU that is signed between Malaysia and Vietnam. I think that development like this are very positive, and it can also pave ways to get more parties involved and in a way build more trust between different states. The role of other maritime powers, especially the five powers defense arrangement, should also not be dismissed. So lastly, I think that Malaysia should also strengthen our defense capability. I think that the defense white paper has listed down a lot of very pertinent modernization plan that needs to take place within the next 10 years. In particular, I think that in the East Malaysia, that there needs to be more assets being moved there. The air defense capability needs to be strengthened, and perhaps we also need to have more naval air bases in East Malaysia. I think that having a bigger defense budget is always a very tricky point to bring out, especially in this climate where the economy has been very badly affected by the pandemic. But I think that a long-term planning is in place, because no planning is an opportunity cost for Malaysia. And I think this is also the area where we should seek to have more cooperation with other partners, including the US. And finally, I think my time is up, but let me also just bring back the point about non-traditional security. I think that more emphasis is needed on ocean governance, especially on marine conservation and climate change mitigation. I think that power contestation should not render South China Sea into a case of tragedy of commons, because there are common interests that we share in South China Sea despite the disputes. So with that, I think I will stop here, and I look forward to more discussion with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivy. Much appreciated. Folks, just another reminder, if you have any questions or comments, please do put them in the Q&A function and not in the chat tab. It's much more easier for us to collect and tabulate, and for the speakers to view them and prepare for them. With that, folks, we move on to our third speaker, Shariman Lokman. Shariman is a director in the Chief Executive's Office at ISIS Malaysia. His research interests include Malaysian foreign and defense policies, Southeast Asian maritime security affairs, Malaysia-China relations, especially in the context of the South China Sea. Shariman also manages the Institute's China Engagement Initiative, which promotes track 2 dialogue between Malaysia and China. And like Ivy, he was involved as a consultant in the Ministry of Defense inaugural Defense White Paper in 2019. Shariman, I turn it over to you, man.
Thank you, Thomas. Good morning, everyone. I'm not going to take too much time. You've heard a couple of very good presentations, and then they've covered a lot of territory, no pun intended, actually. But let me just make very, very quick three points very quickly. First point is this, that I think people on both sides, on the US side and the Malaysian side, need to really, really clear a lot of things up about their perceptions about the South China Sea. Because I believe that there is some degree of impatience growing in the US towards Malaysia. And I think there is perhaps a lack of understanding on the side of Americans, or maybe Malaysians are very bad at explaining themselves to the US. But I think there is a real need for perceptions and intentions to be made a lot clearer. The reason I'm saying this is this. The United States from 2018 until 2022 will have given Malaysia military assistance to the tune of about 230 million US dollars. Now, $230 million. That is not, this is not Middle East levels of assistance. America gives more to the to countries in the Middle East, and maybe perhaps to allies like the Philippines, maybe. But this is not an amount to sniff at. This is 950 million ringgit equivalent. Almost $1 billion ringgit for a period of 5 years. And the official position of the Americans will be to say, well, this is not, we don't expect any reciprocity. This is not something that comes with strings attached. This is for you to use, so on and so forth. So the $230 million consists of things like the 18 Scan Eagle drones that Ivy mentioned, upgrades to our maritime patrol aircraft, 3 of them. Some radar, so on and so forth. It's a great deal of assistance. And I will not be surprised if people in Congress, in various parts of DC are saying, hey, we're not really getting, bang for a buck here, why are these nations not, why can't they be more like Vietnam? Why can't they be more assertive towards China? Why can't they push back a little bit more? I won't be surprised if people say that in DC. And there are a couple of explanations there, but simply I also know that in DC it is people get really upset whenever our government statements say things like, oh, both the United States and China need to tone things down in the South China Sea. This equivalence between America and China that really grates the nerves of people in DC. So yeah, I understand why that happens, but I think the reality of Southeast Asia needs to be explained more clearly by the Malaysian side to our American partners. The simple matter of the fact is this, that $1 billion in trade with China is also something that we cannot sniff at, and it's a reality. The fact that China presents an avenue to grow out of this pandemic, to recover from this pandemic, is also something you cannot sniff at. So Malaysia will always be the sort of like hesitant partner of the United States. It's never going to be quite all in unless the security situation changes drastically. And so you will unfortunately continue to see Malaysian statements that equivocate between America and China. You will continue to see Malaysians, like Satu suggested, a very good suggestion of having P8s fly out of Malaysia, American P8s fly out of Malaysia. That is going to be very, very difficult for my officials to say yes to, because of the fear of a reprisal, of the fear of the costs, economic costs especially, that China is able to impose. On that suggestion, Satu, I think what would be the best way to proceed is actually build on what Malaysia is already doing with the Australians, Operation Gateway. They already have maritime patrol aircrafts flying out of Penang. The best way out of that is, because it's easier for Malaysia to justify that operation because it's been going on since the 70s, looking for Soviet submarine. So that's easy. It's easy to justify things that have been done for some time. My second point, Thomas, I hope I'm not taking too much time.
No, all good.
Yeah, second point is, I must say, I hope I don't seem like too much of a panda hugger here, but it's not all China. Yeah, at sea, the reality at sea for Malaysian maritime law enforcement, especially, is that it's not just China. There is a situation brewing between Malaysia and Vietnam with regards to fisheries, I believe. If you look at the press reports, there are increasing numbers of incursions by Vietnamese fishermen, and there are rumors that Vietnamese maritime law enforcement vessels are very, very aggressive in protecting their fishing fleets. If this is not handled properly, I think it will be very difficult. It will make intra-ASEAN cohesion even more problematic. And so, yeah, I mean, I agree, Satu. The main, I think, challenge to the status quo comes from China, but it is not just China. It is also Vietnam. My third point is very simple, is that I think I think we need to go beyond just freedom of navigation. I think there is a need for us to start talking about how countries can collaborate to ensure that littoral states can legitimately exploit the natural resources in their exclusive economic zones, right? It's not just about ships sailing through, but for the countries of for the littoral states of this, for the coastal states of the South China Sea to be able to exploit oil and gas, to do fisheries within their legitimate EEZs. I think this will be a challenge. It will be a challenge for Malaysia, especially on the oil and gas sector. Simple fact of the matter is that Malaysia is still drilling in the South China Sea, in spite of the energy transition, in spite of the fact that major oil companies are moving away from oil and gas. National oil companies are less susceptible to pressures of the market, really. So they are still going to be drilling in spite of the depressed oil prices or in the long term. So that will continue to attract a lot of heat from neighboring countries and as well from China. And so I think both sides need to start talking about how they can, minimize tensions when this happens, how they can manage pressures, how legitimate claims can be, I wouldn't say enforced, but pursued. So yeah, those are my 3 points really, just to help supplement the already very good comments by our two previous speakers. Number one, I think managing perceptions and misperceptions between Malaysia and US. Number two is not just China. Number three, pay attention to fisheries and oil and gas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shariman. Just before we jump into the Q&A portion of this, and I turn it over to my colleague Angeline. Satu, I wonder if you'd like the opportunity to touch base and reply on some of the points that Ivy and Shariman have sort of brought up that really sort of addressed some of the key points in your presentation as well. We could do like a quick 1.5 minute intervention from you before we move on to the Q&A.
Well, thank you, Thomas. And first of all, let me thank Ivy and Shariman for, as usual, and as I expected, really thoughtful and engaging remarks. Look, I can't touch them all in 90 seconds, but let me touch on what I took away as 2 or 3 really big ones. I wanted to be very clear up front on stability and reassurance that it's mostly China, but not all China. And that's why I said that the main problem is the challenge posed to the status quo by Chinese claims, but by no means is it the only one. I think that intra-ASEAN and intra-Southeast Asia and intra-claimant states coordination and consensus really needs to be built. And Shariman underlined that point by the issue of the fishing vessels. I'm quite aware of these various bespoke arrangements: Malaysia, Vietnam, Philippines, and this country, and this country and that country. I don't think they're sufficient because I don't think they go far enough to addressing their respective overlapping claims, nor do they even issue a joint statement such as we continue to have overlapping and disputed claims, but our overall thrust as fellow Southeast Asians and ASEAN member countries is to not take actions that would exacerbate those disputes. Even a statement like that would go a long way for so-called confidence building among Southeast Asian states, and would be quite symbolic in terms of addressing China. So there are many parties. On the specific issue of P8, I take the point about Operation Gateway in the long running. That also goes back to Australia's role, I think, in the MMEA, Malaysian Maritime Enforcement Agency. Australia has been a major player in that. It's also a member of the FPDA, which has some historical and Commonwealth relationships. But I would say on the P8s, there is a precedent for US flying P8s out of Malaysia. And given the situations with recent PLA aircraft, it would behoove us to think about ways we could do that. Perhaps in the context of air defense with the new ESCOM command, well, not new anymore, but a decade-old ESCOM command in Sabah, for example. So I think there are some opportunities. They will require some forward leaning. I don't obviously speak for the conditions of the KL government, but it's incumbent upon the government in Malaysia to discuss what would be in their interest and what would be workable within their system. I want to make one other point about US views. I will tell you, for what it's worth, from one non-official person, Malaysia's viewpoint has puzzled some of us, but I can just assure you that it is less puzzling than the response of some of our other partners in the region in recent years to South China Sea issues. Let me leave it at that and be mindful of, but I know other countries that have responded to South China Sea issues in ways that are far more puzzling than Malaysia's. Though I will say one thing that continues to puzzle me, and I will go a little bit lean forward and say this. Malaysia always cites its first amongst equals recognition of China in Southeast Asia and its so-called special relationship with China. But a special relationship of that kind requires some understanding of the views of KL as well. And I sometimes do wonder what is the red line where Malaysia will feel that its views are not taken into account despite its special consideration of Beijing's views historically in terms of recognition and other issues. And I think that's a calculation only Malaysia and Malaysian people and Malaysian government can make. But if one thing puzzles us, it's not providing capacity building, because we consider that in our interest, but also the interests of Malaysia. But it does puzzle us that special relationship continues to be flagged as the country challenges your sovereignty, and why that's not more salient in the Malaysian political and economic discourse. Thank you.
Thank you, Satu. Look, I know I said I'm going to turn it over to Angeline, and I'm sorry to have to break my promise there, but Satu, you raised a really interesting point about where that red line is when it comes to China for people in KL, and this has been like sort of a theme in some of the questions that have been coming in the Q&A tab as well. So I'd like to really throw Ivy and Shariman under the bus here. If I could sort of push you guys to sort of respond to that. Where is this red line? Is there a red line? Because I think that's a pretty legitimate question that folks from outside of Malaysia have been asking. Is there a red line? Ivy, if I can go with you first, and then to Shariman.
Well, I think that there's a silver lining in some of the recent events that happened, which is that I think it has actually forced Malaysia, particularly Malaysian policymakers, to come to terms with the fact that there might be a limits in terms of how it used to handle the issues in the past, which is always to minimize as much as possible the confrontation and to sweep it under the carpet, so to speak, as much as they can. So I do not know if there is a sort of very clearly stated red line, but it is clear that some of the actions of China's have definitely ruffled some feathers within the policy elites, particularly in the defense circles. We also see that there seems to be a lack of a coherent response coming from Malaysian government, because we see that the response, the statement was actually made separately by the Air Force and then subsequently the foreign ministries. So one wonders if there have been much internal discussion that take place before the whole PR happen. So it is likely that the government might not be acting very much as a whole of government kind of a response. So I think that is important to also keep in mind, that there are different views and different concerns coming from different corners of the Malaysian policy elites. Yeah, I hope that.
Thank you.
Oh, you evil man, Thomas. Okay, so first of all, what is a red line? Usually people say red line means you cross the red line, we'll bash your head or something like that. If that is what red line means, I don't think that exists, right? You know, in the sense that we're not going to be bashing anyone's heads, unless it's in self-defense. You know, like any ship if a ship gets attacked or something like that, that's a different thing. Okay, obviously it will defend itself. But if a red line means that if you cross this red line, our perceptions will drastically change, right? Our policy will sort of like shift, or maybe it will force us to really rethink how our worldview. I think that red line would be, and you know, Norman Goh, South China Morning Post, I know you are listening, do not quote this as someone from Malaysia saying this, right? It is not an official position, it's just an irrelevant sort of like person's speculation. Okay, that red line would be if they were to try to physically stop an oil and gas operation in the South China Sea. If they were to physically try to stop it, you know, if they fly close to it, if they sail close to it, if they challenge us like 6:30 in the morning every morning, it's fine. That's fine. It's annoying, but we can live with that. But if they were to physically get on a rig and tell everyone stop work and just occupy it, that is, I think, something that will prompt a major rethink in policy. Yeah. So yeah, you heard me, right, Norman? Yeah, I didn't, not official position. Yeah, yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, Ivy and Shariman. Angeline, I pass the floor over to you.
Thank you, Thomas. Good morning, everyone. Well, there are a lot of questions in the Q&A section box, so I would urge the speakers to try to keep their answers as short as possible. But I will take my cue from Thomas and start the session with a question of my own. This question would mostly be for Shariman or Ms. Ivy. So the code of conduct, it was meant to be finalized this year, but it has been delayed. What are your views on Malaysia's progress on the code of conduct negotiations? Do you think we are increasingly hesitant about its effectiveness in upholding stability in the South China Seas?
Shariman, you should go first. You're the senior.
Oh no. Okay. So first of all, code of conduct progress is not really up to us. I was just told yesterday by a couple of friends that negotiations were to be resumed this month in Jakarta, but given the conditions in Jakarta, that's not likely to happen. I think you know, as long as there is no physical meeting, for some reason there is an insistence on a physical meeting in order to negotiate the code of conduct, there will be no meaningful negotiations. So yeah, it's really not up to Malaysia, and But my personal view is that the code of conduct, I agree with what Satu said in his presentation. It's not a silver bullet. It shouldn't be seen as one. That's not whatever people are thinking of doing. Just do it now, because don't wait until the code of conduct comes out.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I think I'll just add that the code of conduct is obviously it will be good when it is finally agreed, and it will be a breakthrough, and in a way it might also make China a little bit more relaxed about the situation. But it is not the be all and end all. Also, I think just to be, we just have to be mindful that it's probably going to take a long while, and there are a lot of very sensitive issues that remain to be resolved. So we should not wait for the code of conduct to come out. I think there are some corporations that can already take place even before. Just to also say that the code of conduct also involves a non-claimant state, so I think that in itself also means that it cannot be sort of a mechanism to resolve some of the disputes. Yeah.
Thank you. So the next two questions are for Satu. So from Chin, there's an argument that the South China Seas would be more stable if less stakeholders were involved. And the involvement of external stakeholders like the US only increases the stability for claimant states. Do you agree that stakeholders should stay away from the South China Sea? And the second question from Shamil, will the emergence of the Quad in the region somewhat intensify competition in the seas? What does this mean for ASEAN centrality?
Right, very quickly, the South China Sea is international waters. Not every bit and parcel of it, but it is part of international waters. Global shipping goes, as you well know, trillions of dollars, 3 trillion, pick your number precisely. So it is a matter of international stakeholders. So I want to really underline the fact that this is not some sort of intrusion by stakeholders into an event or an issue that belongs to one or two parties. This is an international maritime space. There are laws that govern it. The PCA ruling has ruled on parts of those key issues. So I don't see any contradiction there, any more than I continue to see this narrative about Malaysia being between the US and China on the South China Sea. It's not between the US and China on the South China Sea. Malaysia is between Malaysia and China on the South China Sea. The issues on the South China Sea are with China, not with the United States. We don't have any territorial claims, or our role there is supportive. On the second question on the Quad, I do not personally believe, though I completely understand how some ASEAN colleagues believe, that the Quad undermines ASEAN centrality. The Quad is not meant to challenge ASEAN centrality. In fact, many of the things the Quad is dealing with are convergent with the ASEAN Indo-Pacific outlook as articulated. It does not challenge or seek to replace the East Asia Summit. It does not seek to replace ADMM. It's another tool in our tool set, just as much as alliances and partnerships are. So for a large country like the United States with multiple aspirations and commitments and equities and interests, it stands to reason that we would use multiple tools, and the Quad is another tool. I think that one could, if they designed a very careful algorithm, could assess the level of concern about the Quad seems to increase when ASEAN centrality is not very central, and is less concerned when ASEAN has more consensus. So I don't think the Quad directly confronts ASEAN centrality, but I do appreciate and understand how some could see it that way. But I would have to, someone would have to tell me what it's doing to ASEAN that ASEAN isn't doing to itself.
Okay, thank you. The next question, I think is more leaning towards Shariman, but I'd love to hear what Ivy has to say. From Albert Lee, to what extent would you say that China's vaccine diplomacy has affected Malaysia's policy in the South China Sea? Ivy, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I think that Malaysia is obviously so I think that it has received a good volume of Sinovac, and the cooperations with China on the vaccine development is also ongoing. I think that Malaysia is not really thinking so much about South China Sea problem per se when it comes to vaccine cooperation with China, because I think that the vaccine is a very urgent matters that the country needs to overcome. So I think in that sense, I don't think there is much of correlation necessary between the two. And obviously, I think that the help from the US would also really be very, very helpful especially after the arrival of, is it 1 million vaccines yesterday from the US. I think that having different sources of vaccines can help Malaysia to not be too reliant on one partner. Yeah.
So thanks for that. I absolutely agree with Ivy. I think the Malaysian calculation with regards to China is not one in which China is very punitive, or just on a head trigger just respond. If you do not do this, we will deny you that. I don't think that is the calculation. I think there is a. I think China does not respond so willy-nilly to everything that goes on in South China Sea. In fact, you could make the case that China has been quite tolerant in some ways. So I don't think it has affected Malaysian calculations in South China Sea. There is no expectation that China will deny vaccines just because of that.
There's a question from Henrik from RSIS. I think this question can be taken by any of the panelists. What is the possibility of the ASEAN direct communications infrastructure or any kind of hotline in general in playing a role in reducing tensions in the seas? So does hotline?
I don't know anything about it, so I'll have to yield to the other two. Sorry, I haven't done much work on that.
Yeah, Hendrik, I'm sorry, I wasn't aware there was a hotline. I'm not sure between whom and which bureaucracy and which bureaucracy. My general skepticism about hotlines remains. Given China's positions, I'm not sure a hotline conversation in any of the incidents that we've talked about, Laconia Shoal, James Shoal, West Kapala, the air flights, would have in any way changed the outcome or prevented the outcome. These incidents do occur. We've had them in the U.S.-China relationship, EP3, maritime ship encounters, what have you. Have no evidence to think that hotlines in any way mitigated or alleviated those situations. And I certainly wasn't even aware that there were hotlines in the South China Sea case.
There's a question from Dong Fan. How should Vietnam and Malaysia, as well as other Southeast Asian littoral states, manage their maritime disputes, especially on the issue of IUU fishing? Shariman, Ivy, would you like to take this question?
So look, I mean, it's number one, is very, very hard for Vietnam simply because the northern side of the South China Sea, as I understand it, has been fished to death. So what they have to do is to go down south, and when they go down south, they invariably enter Malaysian EEZ. And I mean, it's so bad that you actually have Vietnamese fishermen sailing for a whole month all the way to New Caledonian waters, EEZ, to look for, I don't know what, some special kind of fish, something like that. But that is how far Vietnamese fishermen go to look for catch. So yeah, it's I think the whole environment issue needs to be put at the forefront so that the ecosystem doesn't entirely crash. And then I think that's a good way to start. But as with every workshop that you go to on the South China Sea, when you ask for a suggestion, what is your practical suggestion on how do you to get people to cooperate in the South China Sea? Everyone puts up their hands and say scientific research and environment stuff, right? And when the lawyers come in, it doesn't happen because the lawyers say, oh, you can't do that because that means you're recognizing the claims, so on and so forth. So it's hard. It's very, very hard. Malaysia and Vietnam are negotiating an MOU between the respective coast guards. I think that would help. But we have to bear in mind that coast guards are not the only agencies involved. Yeah, there is the Vietnam Coast Guard. There is also the Vietnam Fisheries Surveillance Agency or something. I don't know the actual name, but they won't be bound by this MOU. So yeah, a more comprehensive MOU at some stage, an agreement of sorts. Yeah, and then maybe we can extend it to the Philippines. But yeah, put environment first, and then start linking up the fisheries agencies. Thank you.
This next question is for Ivy from Andrew, Morocco. Is the South China Sea seen primarily as a national security issue, a diplomatic issue, or an economic issue by the Malaysian government? And how does this understanding shape the way the policy is framed and formed?
I think it is all three. It's really all three. But I think that as we briefly talked about earlier, it at the moment is not seen from a very whole of government kind of approach. So you have the Ministry of Defense primarily looking at it as a security issue, and in fact one of the most main security challenges. And then you also have the others that look at it from different perspectives. So I think that the role of perhaps a more overarching mechanism such as a National Security Council in this issue can actually help to actually bring everybody together and not necessarily just looking at it from one or the other.
Okay, the final question that I have from the audience is for Satu. How can, this is an earlier question from Norman Goh, how can the US play a bigger role in making sure that the South China Sea is safe, free, and have a fair access for maritime space, especially in the context of delayed ASEAN-China Code of Conduct negotiations?
Well, I think the first thing the US can do is work with allies and partners, but also with Southeast Asian claimant states to continue to operate in those waters. And I'm not talking about only freedom of navigation operations themselves, but as our military officers repeatedly say, sometimes our diplomats say, to fly and sail through international waters and not recognize claims that are expansive and contradictory to UNCLOS and other legal instruments. So I think the first thing we can do is continue to operate as if they are international waters where they are international waters. Second, I think it's really important that the US, as I flagged in my opening comments, one of the key issues for us is that we can't be in that area without the support of our allies and partners. And so our work, as Shahriman highlighted with Malaysia in particular, whether that be the Maritime Security Initiative, the recon aircraft that Malaysia has that we helped re-outfit, the maritime drone capabilities, the training, the exercises, the ship visits, which have increased. All of those things are part of a package of maintaining our presence there at the request of allies and partners. We cannot do it without the request of allies and partners. And this is not going to be fixed. It's going to be a dynamic process. It's going to be articulated in national capitals, and we're going to have to negotiate. Some proposals that we've made to the Malaysian government have been rejected, as they've been rejected by other countries in the region. Other proposals have been happily accepted, for example, the Maritime Security Initiative. So it's a dialogue process. We keep working through our various channels, our military commands, our diplomacy at the State Department, other agencies, to continue working. And in my previous visits and consultations in Malaysia, I've always been, to be honest, heartened with the support for engagement, maybe not in every facet or on every initiative, but in general, the strong interest of the Malaysian government and the Malaysian Defense Forces in remaining engaged with the United States. And so I think those are key ways in which we can remain active in the region and to emphasize our legal, diplomatic, and security interests in the region in cooperation with countries such as Malaysia.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Satu. I think we, quickly approaching the end of this webinar. There's about 10 minutes left. So I want to sort of jump in on a particular issue that Shahriman brought up earlier, which is this potential transition away from hydrocarbons. I wonder if all three speakers had sort of any thought to share on that, because one of the main issues, I mean, not just for Malaysia, but even for the Philippines and for Vietnam, is access to hydrocarbons South China Sea, and it potentially is a major factor for China as well. With hydrocarbons, the sort of future pricing of hydrocarbons increasingly unstable, with the cost of drilling actually going up tremendously, which will impact the sort of long-term prospects of a country like Brunei that is significantly dependent on hydrocarbons to stay afloat. How do you see the sort of long-term changes of priority, if I can call it that, of how some of the littoral states, the coastal states in the South China Sea will have when it comes to the price of hydrocarbons? I'm opening it up to any of the panelists who want to jump in on this.
Well, I'll be brave and say that, the hydrocarbon market has been notoriously unpredictable. And I'm not willing to rule out what could happen in the future, but I'll say this. I don't think the heart of the South China Sea issue is about access to hydrocarbons. It's the issue of resources, whether they be fishing or undersea minerals. It's a matter of what's in your EEZ and what's around your territorial claims. But what I do think is that the nationalist impulses that undermine these expensive and illegal claims are the fundamental issue, not oil and not hydrocarbons. And in fact, I can imagine China being less dependent on hydrocarbons before Southeast Asian states are less dependent on hydrocarbons, as you cited in the case, for example, Thomas, of Brunei. So it may well be that China may not need the hydrocarbons as much as they need the historical and nationalist drivers of their claims to the South China Sea. So I would simply say that I've heard this argument before about Petronas, for example, having to go farther out into the South China Sea to tap hydrocarbons, but I'm not sure that that's the driver of the South China Sea disputes. I think it's an element of them, but I don't think it's the cause of them.
Yeah, Thomas, I agree that I think at least for China, it's not the hydrocarbons, definitely. I think for China, it's national pride, dignity, sense of self. I think within China itself, when they talk to each other, they regard themselves as being very, very restrained, and they are being exploited by all these outside countries, including these small little countries, Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam. I don't agree with that view, but that is how they talk among themselves. That they are the ultimate victim here, that they are being prevented from realizing their full territorial expense. And so but I think for Malaysia, in the ranking of issues, I think oil and gas is pretty high for Malaysia. So if you, and I probably get into trouble with some of my colleagues here, but if you look at when Malaysia is particularly slightly bold on the South China Sea, it's not when fisheries are at stake. It is when oil and gas is at stake. So the submission to the Continental Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf, for example, that caused a lot of anger, right, from China. That was because we wanted an extended continental shelf that would allow exploration of oil and gas. So for some reason, when it comes to oil and gas, Malaysia grows a very, very good spine. So yeah, and as with the current oil and gas activities, in spite of harassment, Malaysia is continuing to proceed. So for some reason, oil is a very good way of, it's calcium for us, really. Yeah. So on the oil and gas issue, my view of this has evolved somewhat. I used to think that it's going to be out of the, totally out of the picture. Recently spoke to a very, very good reporter from Energy Wise, good publication, read it as well. Look, he reckons that oil and gas, the BPs, the ExxonMobils of the world will transition away from oil and gas. But there will still be the demand for oil and gas, and that will be, the slack will be picked up by the NOCs, the national oil companies. The Saudi Aramcos, the Petronases of the world will pick up the slack that has been sort of like created as a result of this, of BP and all that, moving quite precipitously towards renewables. So that is also another possible scenario here. Again, people have been proven wrong repeatedly when they speculate on oil and gas and the future of energy, right? But so we don't know whether we are there yet. I think we are on the precipice of something big. I just don't know what it will look like. But a transition is going to happen. But whether it will affect the NOCs, the national oil companies, that is another question. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Shariman and Satu. We are actually at the end of our webinar at 10:45 in the morning. Satu, can I beg another few minutes from you just to sort of bring this to a close? I know it's 10:45 at night. But if I can have a few more minutes, sure, we can sort of bring this home. Excellent, thank you. And to bring this home for us, I'm going to use my privilege as moderator to once again chuck Ivy under the bus. Ivy, we've had some discussions about in the questions and also in some of the remarks brought by Satu and Shariman. There's been a lot of questions about what next for Malaysia if China continues to push. What if an incident like the West Capella, sort of interference with West Capella happens again? there is ongoing drilling, ongoing exploration work right now in the Kasawari field, and the Chinese Coast Guard has been there, not stopping, but continually harassing ships employed by oil and gas companies to do their activities there. Do you think this is going to be a new normal for Malaysia moving forward? Increasingly, our hydrocarbon activities are going to come under significant pressure. And if so, I mean, this is really throwing you under the bus here. If so, what are our potential options here?
Should I go first or should Satu?
No, this is just for you, Ivy.
Okay, great.
Yeah. I've already chucked Shariman under the bus, so I'm expecting like full-on repercussions later. So now it's your turn.
Yeah, so I think that let me try to respond that. I'll also maybe try to pick up again some of the issue that we brought up earlier about the role of the US. I think that we will see increasingly more assertions from China, and especially when it comes to oil exploration. I think that China has made it quite clear that this is not something that they will tolerate. I think like that is something that really feature quite highly in their mind. So in terms of what's next, I think that there is there needs to be a multi-pronged approach. Is everything from strengthening defense capability to ramping up the diplomatic efforts and everything. But I think more specifically to our engagement with the US, I think that the US presence in South China Sea has never been a question for Malaysia. It is welcome. It is very important. I think that some of the frustrations that might have been felt by US officials, I think that it's not necessary from a shift of strategic stance in Malaysia, but I think a lot of times it can be because Malaysia is very distracted right now. There's so many things going on with COVID, political instability and all that. There's not much bandwidth actually given to issues such as South China Sea. And then I think that certain things could also be just, the burden of bureaucracy where, there needs to be approvals upon approvals and things like that really slow down some of the progress of some of the engagement that should, I think, be speed up. So personally, and I'm sure all of us share the view here that Malaysia needs to be more proactive in trying to find a way forward for South China Sea. We cannot afford to be complacent and think that just by doing business as usual and doing what we do in the past in terms of maintaining a very low profile is going to cut it. And as Thomas has used a very nice word, this is a new normal for us in South China Sea. And we really need to step up our game.
Thank you so much, Ivy. Ladies and gentlemen, we have exceeded our time by 5 minutes, and we have come to the end. Before far be it from me to summarize what is a really open-ended discussion and one that can easily go on, but we don't want to keep Satu from his from his beauty sleep. So before I end this and thank the speakers, I'm going to shamelessly plug the Asia Pacific Roundtable that is back again this year. It's happening from the 17th to the 18th of August. And the South China Sea is on the table. We have a balanced panel, a really good panel of participants from Southeast Asia, from China, and the United States. Essentially, I have to say that we managed to get some of the best names from China and the United States when it comes to South China, when it comes to the South China Sea. So you don't want to miss this one. Go to our website. Registration happens on, it's fully virtual and registration is free. with that shameless plug done, please, again, I do apologize if we couldn't take all your questions. It's been a very, very proactive discussion. My sincere thanks to Satu for staying up for us and for joining this webinar. Ivy, who's all the way from Taiwan, and Shariman, for participating in this discussion. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, our thanks to the US Embassy for really working with us in this foreign policy speaker series. I think we're approaching the end of this series. There's about 1 or 2 more sessions left, so do stay tuned to our social media channels for updates on that. With that, once again, join me in thanking all our speakers. Have a good afternoon, have a good afternoon and a good night wherever you are. Take care.
Thank you very much, all. Good day.
Cheers, Satu. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Satu. Thanks, Ivy.